Well, hello there, and welcome to the show. Every Tuesday, I like to sit down with my friend Eric Peters, and this is more of a an effort to maintain my own sanity and maybe get a little therapy out of our conversation. But Eric, as always, it's great to see you and to catch up on what's happening in our wacky world.
Oh, likewise, Brian. As we were talking about a little bit before we went on the air, it's just the strange time that we're in which every day we wake up kind of a little bit clenched, right? Wondering what's next, what's going to happen now. And I think that's deliberate. I think that they want us all sort of on edge. It serves their purpose. They don't want us relaxed, just as they don't want us financially independent. All these things are related. They want us in a state of kind of incipient panic because that way it's easier to control and lead people. And I guess that brings us into what I was mad about the other day, which has to do with the insurance mafia. This is a recurrent topic for me, and I use that term deliberately because it is a mafia. It leverages the power of the state to extract money from people for profit. And I'm talking specifically now about the car insurance mafia, which relates to the issue of affordability. Another thing everybody's talking about, how we're all feeling the squeeze. Well, we're being squeezed by these mafias because they can squeeze us because they've got the ability to kind of hold up that billy club and say, if you don't pay what we say, we're going to tell the state, and then the state is going to go after you. And this gets to what I think is the meat of the matter. So, what are you being punished for exactly? You didn't hand over money to the insurance mafia. You don't have coverage. Well, so what? Who's been harmed by that? I mean, other than the mafia, the mafia doesn't have the money that they want from you. But there's this underlying premise that's rarely discussed that people are being effectively treated as if they had caused harm, or because they might cause harm, they have to pay money to these for profit, mind you. I think that's a key point. Mafias like the insurance mafia. I personally have long been arguing for a long time that a more just standard would be to hold people accountable for the harms that they actually do cause. And I know some people out there will go, oh, if people weren't required to have insurance, there would be people driving without insurance. Well, there are lots of people driving around without insurance. That's exactly my point. It's very much of a piece with these gun control laws, where the people who don't think about it too much think, well, if we only pass a law that forbids criminals from having guns, we won't have gun crime. Good luck with that. The
Right.
responsible people aren't the problem. They never have been the problem. I pay my bills. You pay your bills. If I damage somebody's vehicle, I'd be happy to pay the bills because I did it. I mean, I have a conscience. If I caused harm to somebody else's stuff, I'm going to pay for it. What I really deeply resent is being made to pay ever more money on account of harms I might cause. I might cause them. And think about the principle that is embedded in this too. If it's acceptable morally to make you and me buy insurance because we might cause harm with a car, how about with a gun? How about with a large dog? You and I are pretty big guys. I could, I've got a pretty big fist. I might punch somebody in the face. Maybe there should be a big guy insurance mandate. I should have to buy coverage in case I lose control of myself and punch somebody in the teeth.
There's no end.
There's no end.
The mischief is absolutely endless once we start down that road.
And it's becoming interestingly kind of a crucible thing in that it's always been objectionable. I've long objected to this mandatory insurance stuff, but now they are, in my case, I have zero, not even traffic tickets. I've never filed a claim. I have not had an accident with a vehicle in 30 years. My insurance has doubled over the last 3 years. Why? Because they can. They can offload the costs, I guess, that other people incur onto paying customers like me and you. And I think a lot of people, my article was called, something along the lines of when it snaps and we're at the breaking point. What happens when people are at the point where it's either pay this obnoxious insurance bill for which I get nothing tangible, or pay my electric bill, or pay my rent, or pay my mortgage? I
Right.
think we're getting close to that point.
Let me take you back to 2008, 2009. You remember that was pretty hard times for a lot of
Yes,
people.
yes, it
There
was.
was a very serious contraction of the economy, and I saw businesses close. I saw people lose their jobs, layoffs, and that sort of stuff. And interestingly enough, I had a friend get pulled over during that time, and the officer told him, "Hey, your car is out of date. Your registration's out of date." And he said, "Yeah." He goes, "I had a choice. I could either pay my insurance or pay my registration. I chose to keep it insured."
Mhm.
And I thought that's actually a pretty good answer. And I think the cop actually he wrote him like a fix it ticket or something. Go get this taken care of, and they'll dismiss the ticket. But perfect illustration of the quandary of, okay, I have to choose. There's just not enough money, one or the other.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
he chose the one that he felt carried the least legal consequence. I'll let that one go and pay the insurance.
Yeah, depending on whose numbers you believe, the cost of various, pretty much everything that people would call necessities, things like food and so on, has gone up by about 20 to 30% in the last year or so. Have people's incomes gone up to match? So, you add to that the fact that gas is now $4 and something a gallon. So, it's easily $1.50 more than it was before the start of this stupid war that Trump decided to start. And then you got your insurance mafia doubling the cost of your coverage. At some point, something has got to give. And we haven't even gotten into the health coverage thing. The way the health
Right.
mafia. This is a difficult subject. I almost want to pump my fist and say "Viva Luigi," but I don't because I don't condone murder. However, I understand the anger. I understand the resentment. We're being sheared. I mean, to the point where they're peeling our skin off at this point. These extractive mafias are taking and taking and taking, and they're using the state to take. And the rage is building about this because people recognize it's a scam, it's a grift, it's a vicious scam and a grift. It's not about helping people, it's not about keeping us safe, it's about bleeding us white. And meanwhile, people like the guy, the CEO of the health company and these insurance mafias, look how much money they have to spend on ads. I mean, to constantly pitch us with their stupid little animatronic characters, the Geico Gecko, the Emu, all this. I mean, that's huge money. Have you ever gone to see the corporate headquarters of an insurance mafia?
Oh,
It looks like John Gotti's house, except it's, a 40-story building on top of that. So that's where the money's going. It's not as if these are parsimonious operations. They're just running on the margin, and they're just, they're paying out all these claims as they constantly try to claim. Look at the money that's paid to the CEOs of these companies. It's despicable, it's contemptible, and it's dangerous because eventually something's going to give. Something gave for Luigi. And again, I don't approve of what he did, but I understand why he did it.
yeah. And I think you're right, Eric, in that I think a lot of people are approaching that breaking point. They may not recognize it as such. They feel the stress. They feel, look, I'm having to make choices. I'm having to shuffle things around. But for all of us, there is a point at which we have to decide, can I continue to go along with this? Or, do I kill myself? Do I take on a third, fourth job to pay the taxes so I have the privilege of, you know, um, staying in my home or not living in a jail cell? I don't know. There's going to come a point though we're going to have to make that choice of what do we do. I just want to see, and I know this is the impossible dream, but Erica, I just want to see somebody within the government, be it state, local, or federal, say, hey, these guys are struggling to make ends meet. Why don't we stop taking their money? I don't think it's
I'd
ever
like
going to
to see
happen.
that too. I'd like to see that too, but I do think that there is a more effective way if only enough of us will seize that opportunity, and that is mass noncompliance. I've brought this up many times. You and I have talked about it many times. The prior example being during COVID. If enough of us had simply said, no, I'm not going to play along with this stupidity. I'm not going to put a mask on, stand 6 feet apart. I'm going to go out and live my life normally. I'm going to visit my friends and my family, and just, you better not try to stop me. If enough people had done that, it would have been over. It would have been over within 2 months. Now, if enough of us said, enough of this extractive insurance crap, if I do something, hold me responsible. I actually am not opposed to insurance as such, as a concept. If it's a free market thing, on my own, sure, I would buy a liability policy if it's reasonable. Because my risk is extremely low, I would not object to paying a small amount to cover me in the extreme unlikely event that I am the cause of some kind of damage to some other person. Fine, I'm fine with that. What I resent deeply and I'm sick of is, constantly being treated as if I am some kind of reckless maniac out there committing all kinds of mayhem, or I'm about to. Same kind of thing, for the people, and I'm saying this because there are a lot of people on the 2A side who may be getting mad with me right now, but turn it around and think about it. The same sort of hysteria that the anti 2A people use. We can't have people walking around with guns. They
Right.
might shoot me. It's exactly the same thing. So, get out of your box and think. It's about, is this person actually behaving recklessly or irresponsibly? If he's not, leave him alone. Stop presuming everybody is a reckless criminal. Let's calm down and live as a reasonable society. And part of that is accepting that every now and then, yeah, there's going to be a bad person out there who's going to do something bad. That should not serve as the pretextual justification for assuming that the rest of us are going to start doing the same stuff.
No, I'm with you there. And something that I'm going to recommend, this may sound like a totally academic exercise, but if you have ever, pondered, well, at what point would I put my foot down? Where would I make my stand? I'm going to suggest find the time to sit down and write a personal platform. You don't have to make a book out of it. You can probably do it on, one notepad, but just what are your foundational principles? And I'm suggesting you do this because there's going to come a time where your foundational principles are suddenly going to be at stake. And if you have it written out and you already resolved, this is who I am, this is what I stand for, then it's not so much of a, well, but can I afford this? Is it going to cost me social standing? Is it going to, get me in trouble? People call me names. If it's a part of who you are, then you can hold your head high and just say, this is what I stand for. Whether everybody else stands or not, that's not important. You know what you stand for. Anyway, I hope that's somewhat helpful. A friend suggested it to me years ago, and I found it to be really useful in helping keep my thinking straight.
I think so. And also, we don't have to be yahoos about it. At one time, people were considered characters such as Thoreau and Gandhi admirable people because they stood for their principles. They didn't do it in a violent way. They just said, "Look, this is unjust, and I'm not going to go along with it." And they were willing to go to jail if need be over that. And that kind of gave them the moral high ground, though, because it was obvious these people are not harmful people. They're not doing anything to anybody. Yet they're being hassled and they're being put in handcuffs and being dragged by goons into jail. That ends up working not out so well for the people who have the handcuffs in the jails because it looks bad. We all instinctively have a sense of justice. And when you can just look at it, you don't have to be a philosopher king or an intellectual to recognize that dude didn't do anything. Why is he being hassled? That's not a good look. And that's what I think we ought to do to attack this without actually having to attack anybody.
Yep. And you and I have said this often, but it bears repeating again because we're coming up on election season here in a couple months. And, 2 more years, it'll be the full election cycle again. Stop putting your faith in political saviors.
Oh, yeah.
They'll tell you what you want to hear. Yes, your heart will thrill with the warm words that pour from their mouths, but they're just saying whatever they have to say to get elected.
Yeah,
And I'm saying this, I'm
really
saying this not as an observer, but also as a candidate.
yeah.
It's such a fickle thing. Don't trust political saviors. They're not going to be there for you.
Amen. If Trump has done one good thing, he has helped to kind of hammer that lesson home. So many people, and I include myself among the crowd, are just dispirited and even broken about the way Trump has just completely gone contrary to everything he promised that he was going to do and stand for. Well, but I mean, it teaches us don't look to these people. Whatever they say, they're probably lying. They're probably saying it out of convenience. And when it becomes inconvenient for them to continue to have that point of view, they'll change their point of view. Trust people that that you can depend on because you actually have a track record with those people. Don't trust some political figure out there who's reading from a teleprompter and telling you what you think you want to hear.
Yep, and keep in mind too that I'm painting with a broad brush here when I say this, but um, more and more, even down to the state level, your elected political leaders, especially like your legislators, are less there to serve the people, and they're becoming more of kind of a de facto um, corporate workforce for the
Yeah.
corporate lobbies who are there in great numbers and with checks in hand. Hey, we'll support your reelection and so forth. Um, it just seems there's an awful lot of the moneyed interests that are able to shape public policy. And if the citizens, and I'm trying to remember if it was Pew Research that did this back in 2015, um, somebody did the research about who has the greatest impact in moving the needle on public policy. If you're just a voter, an average citizen, your influence was next to zero.
Sure.
Lobbyists, oh, well, those six-figure checks, they get things done.
Yeah, because government has become a for-profit enterprise ultimately. That's what it's all about. There no longer is a discussion about what people's rights are in the sense of, political rights. It's in the sense of what do you have a right to force somebody else to give you? Really, I mean, it's that's the bottom line. Mencken called it an advance auction of stolen goods, referring to elections, and he's exactly right. Who gets anywhere by saying, "I promise to protect your rights"? Almost nobody. You get elected by saying, "I promise that if you elect me, I'll give you this, that, and the other thing." Per Gilligan from that great episode of the old classic TV series.
Nice. Well, I know it's discouraging in many ways. And I kind of have to fight through this cycle too. I think you and I had talked about there's valleys and there's highs and whatnot, but um, it's sure helpful to know what you stand for more so than just simply who or what you're against.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We need to recover ourselves. In a way, we've kind of flowed with this sort of vague, general, collective understanding of the way the world works for a long time. Well, the world has changed very much. And, I think the realization is dawning that we really are on our own ultimately. And that's not a bad thing. It really isn't. It's about reacquiring control over your own life instead of this sort of implicit dependence on a system. It seemed okay when the system didn't seem so malicious. The system has become malicious. So now it's more important than ever to recapture, to recover our independence and our control over everything, over our thoughts, over our food, over our health, over everything.
It's, I guess this is one of those things. The price of liberty, I think Jefferson said, is eternal vigilance. And unfortunately, we've got a lot of people kind of trained to think that, yeah, but that's why we elect people. It's their job to be vigilant. And I'm not trying to destroy anybody's political faith here, but I probably am throwing some pretty cold water
No,
on,
I mean, we've got to
their
pay
burning
attention.
testimony of, oh, but they're here to help us.
We've got to pay attention, and we've got to stop paying attention to things that are superficial, trivial, and destructive. And that includes social media, sports ball. I understand some people like that, but there are more important things to occupy your time and your mind than that. Worthwhile pursuits, worthwhile hobbies, family friendships, all of these things, those matter. Those are the sorts of things that used to matter to men once upon a time. I mean, I'm being patriarchal and sexist here. It matters to women also, but you take my point. We need to be serious again and stop being infantile and just sitting there passively waiting for mommy and daddy, the government, to tell us what to do and to save us.
By the way, I want to take a moment here to kind of grandstand for a moment about flock cameras.
Yeah.
Um, Interestingly enough, here locally where I live in South Central Idaho, there has been some success in putting pressure on local municipalities not to approve, money in their budgets for flock cameras. But a good friend of mine has kind of put the call out there, and just said, "Look, people, I know you're busy. I know you're spending time with your kids. You're hitting the gym, putting food on the table. Maybe you're apathetic about politics, but," he said, "you need to tap in for the next few months."
Yeah.
And specifically, you need to talk about flock and axon cameras, AI powered systems that track your movements and keep a massive database. And he gives a couple of examples of, first of all, the dozens of cops who have faced charges or otherwise been disciplined for misusing the information that flock cameras was keeping on every passing car. Where is my girlfriend's car? They plug in the license plate, whatever. There's also people being pulled over because the camera flags their car and
Yeah.
says, "Oh, there's a suspected murderer in that car,"
Yeah.
except
At
it's
gunpoint.
not. At
Yes.
gunpoint,
Yeah.
and very dangerous situation triggered for no reason, and yet we're told, but it makes policing easier.
Of course it
It's not a
does. It
good.
does make policing easier. Why not put cameras in people's bathrooms and bedrooms? This is my standard rebuttal to these people. If you've got nothing to hide, why not? How about we have drones with cameras on 24/7 surveillance floating over Garrett Langley's house and following his kids around, to make sure they're safe, make
Yeah.
sure nothing untoward. I think my sense of it is, I hope I'm right about this, is we have reached a critical mass moment. People have had it with this stuff. In my own field in cars, people have had it with cars spying on them. They don't like it. They don't want it. They're not putting up with it. I think we're seeing the beginnings of a major backlash because it's enough already, you
Yep.
know,
And
and
Flock has stepped up. I mean, they're doing the full PR push of, well, this is good, and look at all the police departments that love what we're doing, and so there's a PR war that's being fought here. You
Mhm.
should probably be aware of that.
Yeah, and I think they're going to lose it ultimately. The East German secret police would make the same arguments that Garrett Langley and Flock are making. As far as, well, we got to make sure there's no law breaking evildoers. That's why we've got all these, secret agents out there and all these cameras, and that's why we're tapping everybody's phones.
Yep.
We're keeping you safe. It doesn't fly. People get it. Again, this is like an instinctive thing. You don't have to be a genius to figure this out. Nobody wants to be watched all the time. It's just insufferable. It's so obnoxious, and that's good. They pushed it a little bit too hard, I think, just like they pushed it a little bit too hard during COVID. If they'd been smarter about it, they would have been a little less pushy about it, and they might have gotten further down the road. I think people have finally just said, I'm not dealing with this anymore. It's intolerable. I'm not going along with it. And that's good. It might be our salvation. I hope so.
And it needs to be something that's not a partisan issue. My friend says, look, okay, Democrats, imagine Republicans tracking you as you put up your pride flags, or you buy weed in a neighboring state where it's legal, or you buy certain books the GOP doesn't like. Republicans, he says, imagine President Gavin Newsom's FBI tapping into, the local cameras to check your trips to the gun store or your church gatherings or your political meetings.
Absolutely.
And, some would say, well, that just sounds like hyperbole. But the problem is these aren't unthinkable scenarios. They're actually very likely given what we saw happen during COVID. I don't know how people who lived through the lockdowns could look at flock cameras and see anything but, woo, that really ups the ante.
It does. And I think people do see it. And I do think you're right that irrespective of your ideology, they see it. Unless they're really dumb, and there are some dumb people out there, but people of at least some average intelligence who have any degree of instinctive self-preservation get it. They might like the idea of these cameras being used against their political adversaries, but they do understand that it can turn around on them too.
Yep.
And that this is a disaster for everybody. And again, they pushed it really hard. Do you know there were no flock cameras at all to speak of in 2024, barely 2 years ago? And now get a map out and look at how many
Everywhere.
everywhere. They're pushing it. If they've been a little more subtle about it, but they haven't been, and there are all these stories popping up every single day about people being dragged out of their cars at gunpoint because a flock camera misidentified a numeral on their license plate, or some creepy cop is stalking some woman, something like that. It's happening every day and people are getting it. And that's good.
Yep. I would encourage people check out DFlock, whatever your state happens to be, and you'll find some good resources. If nothing else, you know where the cameras are and which intersections to avoid, unless you're into being tracked, which
And by the
maybe
way,
some
Garrett
people
Langley,
are.
did you know Garrett Langley, the CEO of Flock, characterizes DFlock as a terrorist organization?
I've heard that. Where have I heard that kind of rhetoric before? This is
Yeah.
like the chimp.
Right. Except it's worse because now it's not just the government, it's these creepy private corporations that are doing this stuff. They've
Here,
offloaded
here.
all the tyranny to the private sector.
No, and this again, we're urging people be cautious, but be informed about it. And look, if you get angry, that's good. That means your conscience is still working. Put that to good use and resolve. I will not go along with this. I
Yep.
don't have to participate in my own enslavement.
Yep. Raise the black flag, at least in your mind.
Here,
Assume the
here.
mentality. Be a buccaneer, but in a good way, kind of like Pirates of the Caribbean.
I love it. I feel like this is a very positive note on which to end today's show. Eric,
Excellent.
great as always to visit with you. I look forward to our conversation next week.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.